The story of Captain Henry Green. The date man started hunting whales is unknown. What we often think of as a uniquely American industry actually began as early as the 7th or 8th century, when the Basques of Spain began organizing fishing crews to actively hunt right whales. On Long Island, Southampton town began passing whaling regulations soon after its founding in 1640. Two types of whales were prized for their oil and baleen, the right whale and the bowhead whales. Oil was used in the manufacture of candles, soap, textiles, leather, paints, varnishes, and later in time as a lubricant for machinery. The whales also had a bony fringe in their mouths called baleen, which was in demand for use in the manufacture of corsets and hoop skirts. During the early 1700s, whaling captains also began hunting sperm whales for spermaceti and ambergris. Spermaceti, a waxy substance, produced an unparalleled bright and clear candlelight, and ambergris gave longevity to perfumes. By the 1740s, whalers began moving offshore because whales were scarce along the Atlantic shoreline. Captains soon began to guide their ships to the far north or south and to the Pacific Ocean in search of whales. The Industrial Revolution heightened the demand for the whale products and ushered in what could be called the Golden Age of whaling. Depending on the voyage, whaleboat owners could double or even triple their investment. By 1861, the whale population was close to extinction. Inventors found that menhaden oil could replace whale oil, and the golden age of whaling was over. Sag Harbor, one of the largest whaling ports on Long Island, was a busy place at the beginning of the 19th century. Filled with bustling docks and businesses that catered to ocean-bound ships, the waterfront area was the lifeblood of the community. Barrels of whale oil, precious to the local and national economies, frequently would line the main roads of the village as ships with full holds unloaded their cargo. Born in Sag Harbor in 1794, Henry J. Green grew up to be one of the longest-serving whaling captains of the East End. One of 7 children of John and Charity Green, Henry Green, like most of the children of Sag Harbor, was probably surrounded by the tales of foreign places seen by the early whalers. Green courted and eventually married Roxana Stewart Fordham, who was 11 years his junior. The couple had 7 children, but only 5 survived into adulthood. There was nothing romantic about whaling. Life consisted of days of boredom interspersed by minutes of intense danger, followed by hours of smelly, hard labor. Migrating from the extreme northern latitudes to the far south, whalers searched the world's ocean for pods of baleen whales. Not every whale was hunted. Whalers looked only for bowhead, right, or sperm whales, since these whales produced a clean, burning oil. Once the ship spotted a whale, smaller boats were lowered into the water to harpoon the animal. The carcass was then pulled alongside the ship, where it was cut up and cooked to obtain the precious oil. The bones and the baleen were also gathered for use in clothing and various goods. Whaling voyages usually lasted until the hold was filled with whale oil, bone, and baleen. If a ship was lucky, then the voyage would last a year. However, it was not unusual for a single voyage to take up to 4 years before returning home. The most unlucky ships never returned. Angry whales were known to ram or overturn whaling ships and boats, killing all on board. Despite the danger involved during the golden age of whaling, profits balanced out the risks. It was during this time period that Henry J. Green sailed, first as a hand on the Fair Helen under Captain Oliver Fowler in 1817, and then taking command of his first ship, the Abigail, in 1821. Wednesday, August 28, 1839. A prize schooner. Captain Henry Green of this place very politely called upon us last evening after our paper was made up, and gave us the items of the following extraordinary adventure. The Corrector. Henry Green, while out duck hunting with his friend Captain Petaya Fordham at Fort Pond Bay near Sag Harbor, discovered 4 Africans with no other covering save a blanket and who could talk neither English, French, or Spanish, but one of them understood a little of the first. They inquired what country this was and whether it was a slave country, etc. It turned out that the people Green and Fordham encountered were enslaved people from the La Amistad. Green assisted with the return of the La Amistad, which had been overtaken by the enslaved people, and eventually the slaves from Mendez, Africa, were declared free. From the Sag Harbor Corrector, February 14, 1849. Thus this company, Southampton and California Mining and Trading Company, have left these diggings for the gold diggings of California, under the command of a captain and other officers who, like many others of the company, are accounted old seamen, old whalemen, and old commanders, and good at all. But let public opinion be what it may, one is that some of the principal ones are rather green, and let their experiences be over so great it will ever remain green. Early in 1849, Sag Harbor, like so many other parts of the country, caught gold fever. Henry Green, along with 50 other men, formed the Southampton and California Mining and Trading Company. With Green at the helm, the company set sail for San Francisco in the Sabina, with 85 people on board, all dreaming of striking it rich by scooping up the gold, which they were all sure was lying on the ground waiting for them. Rounding Cape Horn and sailing back up the coast to California, the ship arrived at San Francisco to find the harbor jammed with ships of fortune seekers who had arrived before them. Once moored, the crew disembarked. Green found, like so many captains before him, that it was impossible to hire another crew to sail the Sabina home. Gold fever was striking sailors as well as landlubbers. The ship was sold as a storehouse. Eventually it was stripped and sunk into the harbor. A year later, Green realized that grubbing for gold wasn't for him. He packed his trunk and took the stagecoach back home to Sag Harbor. During the 1850s, Main Road in eastern Cutchogue and western Peconic became a popular retirement spot for successful whaling captains. In their youth, these men had learned to be farmers before going to sea. Tired of the long ocean voyages, now these men longed for a second career as gentlemen farmers, surrounded by their families. The area became known as Whalers' Row. Jacob Appleby Sr., a nearby sheep farmer, christened the stretch of road Blubber Row, or as some others also laughingly called it, Blubberville. In 1851, shortly after his return from California, Roxana and Henry Green moved from Sag Harbor to the Main Road in Peconic. The couple purchased a farm and a snug gambreled roof house from Benjamin Case. Green settled into the life of a gentleman farmer. March 20, 1852. Captain H. Green goes to Washington on very important business to sell the Secretary of State, Daniel Webster, a chart of Japan found on board a Chinese junk by Captain Mercator Cooper on a whaling voyage. This was to assist an exploring expedition now getting up by the United States. William Chatfield Buckingham Diary, reprinted in the Long Island Traveler, Mattaduck Watchman. In 1845, Mercator Cooper, Henry Green's brother-in-law, rescued 22 Japanese sailors and some of their possessions from a shipwreck off the coast of Japan. His return of the sailors to Tokyo made his ship Manhattan the first American ship to visit the country, which was closed to all outsiders. A map of Japan was obtained by Cooper during the rescue, which at the time was a rarity. When the United States decided to force the Japanese to open the country to American trade in 1852, Greene personally transported Cooper's map to Secretary of State Daniel Webster in Washington, D.C. After his 1852 trip to Washington, D.C., for the next 21 years, Henry Greene settled into the peaceful life of a gentleman farmer. His son Florence and daughters Helen and Mary continued to live with him and his wife Roxana. Greene passed away on June 27, 1873, at the age of 79, and was buried in Sag Harbor in Oakland Cemetery. Support Southold Historical Society.